For all that celebrations are magnificent, at the heart of the pageantry is a simple message: service.
I have a role as Colonel of the Blues and Rolls in the Household Cavalry Regiment as Goldstick. And Goldstick was the original close protection officer.
You taught your daughter to be bold like you, Anne. That's the problem. Royals don't raise rebels. We raise symbols. The words dripped from Queen Camilla's mouth like slow poison, perfectly timed and razor sharp. Princess Anne, Britain's most stoic royal, blinked only once. But the silence in Buckingham Palace's private salon turned glacial. To outsiders, this was just a casual gathering of senior royals. But inside, something else boiled. This was no polite tea meeting. This was a subtle war of succession, influence, and legacies. And it had just exploded in public fashion. Camilla had crossed a line. A very old line. Camilla's venomous remark came after Anne had quietly defended her decision, never to seek royal titles for her daughter, Zara. Zara Tindall is beloved by the British public, a charismatic figure who blends royal grace with athletic authenticity. Yet to Camilla, Zara represents defiance of protocol, a threat to a carefully curated image of royal obedience. You stripped her of the dignity of duty, Camilla added, her eyes scanning the silent courtiers. A princess without a crown is just a woman with complicated heritage. Anne's silence didn't mean submission. The Princess Royal has spent decades embodying discipline, loyalty, and resilience, serving the monarchy without complaint. She had no need for titles to validate her children. What triggered Camilla's sudden outburst wasn't merely Anne's parenting. It was fear. Fear that the monarchy was shifting its center of gravity away from her. Witnesses at the palace say it wasn't the first time Camilla showed disdain for Anne. For years, there's been a private Cold War between the Queen Consort and the Princess Royal. Anne, daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, carries old-world royal bloodline dignity. Camilla, once a scandalized mistress, is still fighting to be seen as legitimate. And Anne knows it. Your duties have become performative, Anne, Camilla snapped. You attend, but you no longer serve. You are there for tradition, not transformation. But it didn't stop there. Camilla then shifted her target. And your husband, Camilla added with a smirk, is a charming court jester, always available for laughs, interviews, and rugby commentary. Is this what the monarchy needs now, entertainment over service? The room gasped in slow motion. It wasn't just insult, it was desecration. Mike Tindall, a former rugby captain, had never claimed royal titles. His charm and normalcy made him a media darling, something Camilla clearly resented. And in that moment, Anne's dignity trembled under the weight of personal assault. But Anne didn't answer, because someone else did. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who had quietly observed until now, stood with elegance sharpened by steel. Enough, Catherine said, her voice neither raised nor shaken. This isn't how we speak to those who have carried this institution with grace and grit. Every head turned. This wasn't just a defense, it was a declaration. Catherine, long seen as the embodiment of modern monarchy, chose her moment with surgical precision, and she used it to draw a boundary in blood. Anne has served longer and harder than most. She chose to raise her daughter with integrity, not entitlement. That's not rebellion, that's evolution. Camilla frozen, because underneath Catherine's poise was a promise. The tide is turning. This wasn't just about Zara or Anne. This was about what the monarchy will look like tomorrow. And Catherine had made it clear. Camilla may hold the title of queen today, but public loyalty, generational trust, and institutional grace are being redirected. To the woman in navy blue, standing beside Anne. And for Camilla, that was the most humiliating loss. The air in Buckingham's private salon had stilled. Camilla, still clutching her wineglass, narrowed her eyes as Catherine's words echoed. Across from her, Anne sat upright, her spine as unbending as the saber she once bore during military parades. She didn't speak at first, didn't need to. Her silence carried the weight of decades of duty, discipline, and dignity, forged under the reign of a mother who rarely showed affection, but always demanded excellence. Then Anne's voice measured, low, unmistakably royal, cut through the tension. You speak of spirit, Camilla, yet you mock the very one that built this house when the rest of us were still learning to crawl through its halls. A hush. Even Edward and Sophie paused mid-glance. Anne stood. I served this monarchy before I even understood it. While you, Camilla, were chasing invitations to garden parties, I was conducting state visits with the Queen at my side. Her tone was not angry, it was surgical. You talk of tradition, but what you mean is obedience. And I have never been obedient to hypocrisy. Camilla scoffed. Oh, please, Anne. You didn't give Zara a title because you knew she wouldn't last 2 weeks at a royal function. Admit it, she's just like you. Untamable, unrefined. Anne didn't blink. I didn't give her a title because I wanted her free. Free from the very rot you're trying to bring back into this family ego dressed as etiquette. A few heads turned. Even Beatrice leaned in. Anne's voice strengthened. You speak of raising a daughter with grace, yet yours, Laura, was raised to avoid scrutiny, not responsibility. Do not confuse polished silence with earned respect. Camilla stiffened. You married a rugby player, Anne. A brute in a cheap suit. It was an obvious jab at Mike Tyndall. Cheap. Personal. Anne's eyes narrowed, but she remained composed. Yes, I did. A man who never pretended to be more than he is. Loyal. Honest. And beside me, not behind me. Something I dare say you've never known. From the corner of the room, Catherine watched in quiet awe. Here was Anne, the woman once dismissed as severe, now blazing with sovereign grace. I have never asked for applause, Anne continued, nor power. But I have protected this crown longer than most have protected their reputations. She stepped closer. And if you believe for a moment that this family will follow your lead once William becomes king, then you've mistaken silence for submission. Camilla turned crimson. Charles, she began, desperate now, would never allow this kind of disrespect. Anne didn't flinch. Charles, she said carefully, knows what loyalty looks like. He's seen it in the face of his sister, and one day he will see it in the eyes of his son and daughter-in-law. Then, a pause, because the future belongs to those who serve, not those who scheme. Across the room, even the portraits seemed to listen. Camilla said nothing, but Catherine stepped forward again this time, softer. Not as a warrior, but as a daughter of the crown. Princess Anne has given more to this family than any of us will ever fully understand, she said gently. She doesn't just carry tradition, she protects it from corruption. Camilla's lips curled. Are you accusing me of corruption, dear? Catherine smiled, the kind of smile that ends conversations. I don't need to. History will. From a hallway beyond the salon, Prince William approached, having overheard the last exchange. His presence signaled the next act was about to begin. But before he could speak, Anne turned to Catherine. You didn't need to defend me, she said. Catherine's reply was quiet. I didn't. I defended the crown. The atmosphere shifted. Lines had been drawn not with swords, but with truth. As staff discreetly cleared the tea set, and whispers followed them into the marble corridors, one truth hung above them all. Camilla had come to assert dominance, but instead, she triggered an alliance more powerful than titles. A legacy built by queens of steel, not silk. The marble silence of Buckingham's salon hadn't even settled when Prince William stepped in. Not with grandeur, not with noise, but with the quiet command of a man who no longer waited to be told what his role was. He had written it himself. Camilla straightened instinctively when she saw him. There was always a flicker in her eyes when William entered a room. A memory of the boy who had once refused to hold her hand at Balmoral. The boy who, at age 15, had stood beside his mother's coffin and never once looked at her. He was no longer that boy. William, Camilla said, a brittle smile blooming. What perfect timing. Your wife has just reminded everyone why she will be queen, he interrupted calmly. Camilla blinked. Anne stood taller. A subtle nod passed between siblings. William moved toward the hearth, eyes never leaving Camilla. There's something you should know, he said evenly. Something the public doesn't, yet. He paused. Then, to the room. My father made arrangements. Years ago. After his diagnosis, it was between him, Princess Anne, and myself. A private pact. Gasps didn't fill the room, but the temperature shifted. He knew there might come a time when he could no longer lead fully. So he asked us to prepare not just for succession, but for continuity, for protection, for purpose. Camilla's voice cracked faintly. And me? William's expression didn't change. You were not part of the agreement. She inhaled sharply. It wasn't personal, he added. It was practical. My father understood that the monarchy's survival depended not on who married into it, but who was born to carry it forward. A flicker of pain crossed her face. But William wasn't cruel. He wasn't here for vengeance. I respect what you've endured, he said carefully. But respect is not entitlement. You were the queen consort because my father loved you. You will be queen dowager because tradition demands it. But you will not hold influence over the reign that follows. He turned slightly. Catherine is the future. Not just mine, the nation's. Camilla's hand shook slightly as she reached for her bracelet, a nervous tick, William noticed. You will be honored, but you will not be centered, he added. Then, to everyone, the crown must now reflect who we are becoming, not what we feared to change. Anne approached then, standing by William. Our father's wish, she said firmly, was that William lead decisively, and that I stand by him. Camilla looked between them, her mouth opened, then closed. Behind her, Sophie's eyes dropped. Edward looked away. And for the first time, the once undisputed queen consort looked truly cornered, not by scandal, but by legacy. Anne delivered the final strike, not cruel, not loud, but deeply British. You said I raised a wild daughter, perhaps, but Zara never needed a title to be respected. Then Catherine stepped forward, gently placing a hand on William's arm. My husband will reign with integrity, she said, and with memory. Camilla's mask cracked. You think I'm an embarrassment to this family? No, Catherine replied. I think you're a reminder. Camilla's eyes filled. She turned slightly, away from the firelight. William offered no apology, only clarity. You will always have a place here, he said, but no longer at the center of the stage. And with that, he nodded to Anne. They exited side by side, the real heirs to a legacy that never needed to scream. Behind them, Camilla stood frozen, surrounded by portraits of women she had once tried to emulate. Women who had ruled with duty, not dominance. Down the corridor of polished stone and ancestral portraits, one door was closed to all but two people. No press, no aides, no Camilla. Inside the private office of the Prime Minister at number 10, Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat across from Britain's elected leader. Her poise was impeccable, her expression calm, but behind her composed eyes was a growing fire, one born from duty, grief, and the weight of rising expectation. The meeting had not been formally announced. It wasn't on the public schedule. It had been arranged quietly, after a phone call, not from King Charles, but from Princess Anne. Anne had spoken only a few words that morning. It's time. She's the one now. The Prime Minister nodded slowly, his hands folded. He'd spent decades watching royals walk in and out of this office, some ceremonial, others politically naive. But Catherine was different. I understand you wanted this meeting to remain off-record, he began. Catherine didn't flinch. For now, she said. But what we say today will echo through everything that comes next. She leaned forward, her voice still gentle, but now layered with authority. The king's health is stable, but not strong. He won't abdicate that much, I know. But the monarchy cannot drift. We cannot be half present to the world. The Prime Minister let out a sigh. I've received the briefing from the palace doctor and the cabinet secretary. He's fulfilling fewer engagements. Anne's carrying much of the public burden. And now, so are you. Catherine offered no denial. She didn't need to. What do you need from me? He asked quietly. Catherine's eyes met his. Continuity, stability, discretion, and when the moment comes, clarity. Ho. There was a pause. The Prime Minister reached for a file. Not thick, but weighty. Inside were reports about public trust, constitutional precedents, internal communications between the Cabinet Office and the royal household. One tab was marked simply, Operation Celestial, the transition plan, not for Charles, but for William and Catherine. He opened the page and spoke plainly. You want the machinery in motion, without saying the word succession. No, Catherine said. I want it understood that the crown is not waiting. It is watching. It is preparing. Her words were cold steel wrapped in silk. We must avoid the vacuum that followed the Queen's death, she continued. We cannot stumble into this next era. The Prime Minister studied her. And Camilla? That name dropped like a pebble into still water. Catherine didn't react at first. She will remain respected, protected, but not active, Catherine said. When the time comes, she will be the Queen Dowager. Nothing more. And if she resists, she won't be given the chance, Catherine replied, not harshly, but with finality. For the first time in the meeting, the Prime Minister sat back. There it was. The quiet strategy everyone had felt forming, but now it had a voice. A female voice. A voice not born into monarchy, but chosen by it, endured by it, sharpened by it. Catherine's face softened. This is not about vengeance or humiliation, but the monarchy cannot be trapped in the past. Diana's ghost still lives in public memory. Camilla cannot lead this institution, not morally, not symbolically. The people won't follow her. The Prime Minister looked down at the file again. Public favorability numbers. Catherine's approval rating had risen steadily since her return to public life post-treatment. Camilla's had dropped to historic lows after her very public clash with Princess Anne and tone-deaf remarks about tradition and bloodlines. A fragile monarchy couldn't afford that fracture. Your speech in Manchester, the one about community grief, he noted. I watched it again this morning. It was stateswoman-like. Catherine gave a small nod. Grief unites people, but only if it's led. And William? He's ready. But I need to be more than beside him. I need to be seen beside him. Not just a wife, not a consort, a sovereign in training. Her voice lowered. The crown sits on both our heads, even if only one wears it. It was then that the Prime Minister saw what Anne and Charles had seen too. Catherine was no longer preparing to become queen. She already was one. The door opened later than expected. Aide-de-camp, press secretary, a private bodyguard. They all glanced up as Catherine emerged, expression unchanged. But something had changed. A line had been crossed. A silent coronation had begun. From that day on, she was no longer simply the Princess of Wales. She was her in headlines. She, the staff whispers. The one, in Anne's measured voice. Even Camilla could feel the shift. Her calls to Charles went unanswered more often. Her invitations to certain diplomatic dinners were quietly declined. The public appearances now featured Catherine at the center, Camilla flanking the edges. Within 3 weeks of that meeting, the royal press office began to change the phrasing in official releases. No longer on behalf of the king and queen, but at the direction of their royal highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales. It was protocol reshaped by precision. Catherine had not demanded power. She had summoned its arrival. The palace staff had a new saying by then, whispered with a smile. Camilla ruled the room. Catherine rules the future. Silence reigned in the East drawing room, yet it felt deafening. Catherine's words still lingered in the air like a royal decree, unshakable and sharp as glass. Every eye darted between her composed figure and the visibly shaken Camilla. And then, in a moment that would become the whispered headline of every palace corridor, Catherine stepped forward, not in aggression, but in grace. "Respect is not inherited, it is earned," she said, looking directly at Camilla. "And no one earns it by tearing down the legacy of those who built this family from duty, not desire." Camilla blinked rapidly, her usual smirk replaced with a rare expression uncertainty. It was clear now. Catherine wasn't simply defending Anne. She was drawing a line. The room, once an echo chamber of gossip and hierarchy, had shifted. The future queen wasn't waiting for a crown. She was already wearing authority. The tension didn't dissipate with Catherine's speech, it evolved. Prince Edward cleared his throat and subtly moved closer to Anne. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, gave Catherine a small, respectful nod, an unspoken alliance forming in the shadows of protocol. Even Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, often quiet at these gatherings, seemed to instinctively distance themselves from Camilla. For a woman once labeled the real queen by royal loyalists, this subtle exodus was damning. Camilla tried to regain footing. "I've only ever wanted what's best for this institution," she said hoarsely, but her voice wavered under the scrutiny of the room. "I've endured my share of judgment, public scrutiny, unfounded comparisons, cruel stories." Catherine's reply was calm, but surgical. "And yet, you hand out judgment as if your own crown were forged without scandal." It wasn't just a retort, it was a reckoning. Anne remained composed, as always, but her silence now spoke of quiet vindication. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to strike back. Catherine had done what even she, the battle-hardened royal veteran, never expected. She'd stood for her, publicly, unflinchingly. That mattered, especially after years of quiet sacrifice, overlooked duties, and being labeled the no-nonsense workhorse, while others played to cameras and crowds. Zara's name wasn't brought up again. It didn't need to be. Everyone in the room now understood. Anne's decisions weren't failures of conformity. They were triumphs of integrity. Charles's absence and message. But one shadow loomed larger than Camilla's, the absent king. Charles had not attended this private family summit. His doctors had advised against unnecessary emotional strain, and palace aides claimed he was resting in Sandringham. But a letter had arrived. Sealed with the royal crest and delivered by footmen, it was handed directly to Catherine. She opened it slowly, scanning its brief contents. Then, without hesitation, she read aloud, "To my beloved family, the future lies not in clinging to the weight of past thrones, but in passing the torch to hands that have shown both wisdom and strength. I trust in William, I believe in Catherine, and I thank Anne for never abandoning her post, even when applause was denied. With love and peace, Charles heir." A hush fell over the room. Camilla looked as if the floor beneath her had cracked open. The very man she once referred to as her fortress of favor had, in a single note, validated her rivals and neutralized her leverage. The shift becomes official. After the reading, it became clear something official was underway. Catherine and William would, according to the king's statement, begin taking over ceremonial duties, entirely state dinners, national addresses, and even, reportedly, the initial preparations for their own coronation. Anne, too, had been quietly invited to join a new advisory council, a post reserved for only the most trusted royal seniors. It was a subtle rebuke to Camilla's accusations, proof that Anne wasn't being sidelined. She was being repositioned. Camilla, meanwhile, would not be receiving any new roles. No public engagements had been scheduled for her in the next quarter, no duties delegated, not even a symbolic title update. She had become, effectively, the first queen consort in modern royal history to be softly retired before the death or abdication of her husband. And the press? They were already spinning the story. Queen without duties? Camilla retreats as Catherine ascends. Anne vindicated, after palace confrontation. The headlines had begun. Outside the palace, something else was happening. Public response. On social media, clips of Catherine's remarks captured by leaks or purposeful hands were circulating with lightning speed. Hashtags, like #Catherine the True Queen and #Stand with Anne, trended for days. Editorials praised Anne as the unsung heroine of the monarchy, while opinion columns lauded Catherine's poised intervention as the moment modern royalty truly arrived. Meanwhile, Camilla's image suffered a severe blow. The comment sections were unkind, referencing Diana, past scandals, and the arrogance of borrowed crowns. Even long-standing supporters hesitated. The palace didn't issue rebuttals. It didn't need to. Silence, in this case, was its own verdict. The final blow private, but devastating. A week after the incident, Camilla requested a private audience with William. It was granted. Only 2 people know what was said in that room, but what emerged was this. Camilla would begin withdrawing from public life, voluntarily. She would focus on charitable work in private capacity and retreat to Highgrove House. And she would not under any circumstances be involved in coronation planning. William's reported response, "I will honor you as my father's wife, but I will not build a monarchy around resentment." And that was that. The last rays of September sunlight glazed the spires of Westminster, casting long shadows over the palace courtyard, where whispers of a new era had already begun to swirl like autumn leaves. Inside Buckingham Palace, the mood was taut, not mournful, but anticipatory. Something profound was shifting, and everyone could feel it. For months, King Charles III had been retreating from public view. His official portrait, once prominently hung beside the grand staircase, had been moved quietly to a side hallway. No grand announcements were made, no press release, only a soft recalibration of protocol, timetables, and priority seating. Now, all eyes turned toward William and Catherine, no longer merely heirs, but leaders in every way that mattered. The royal court had begun referring to them, internally, as their majesties in waiting, a title unofficial yet unmistakable. Ministers scheduled briefings directly with William. Foreign envoys addressed correspondence jointly to him and Catherine. The balance of power had not just tilted, it had shifted. But it was the fate of one woman that now occupied the hushed conversations behind velvet drapes: Camilla. Contrary to her early ambitions, Camilla did not hold court in this new chapter. She was not standing on the palace balcony, nor gracing the front pages of state visits. Instead, she was spotted quietly departing for Mill House, her private Wiltshire residence, just days before a key royal engagement hosted by Catherine. There was no announcement, no farewell statement, only the silence of sidelining. Legally, her future had already been written. Upon Charles's withdrawal, whether permanent or as part of a long transition, Camilla would become Queen Dowager, not Queen Mother. A subtle but significant distinction. The title offered ceremonial respect, but no political weight, and certainly no influence over the new monarchy's direction. The public never fully warmed to her, barely noticed her absence. Opinion polls had long shown lukewarm support, with Catherine consistently dominating in approval, admiration, and global reach. Royal commentators speculated that Camilla's soft retirement had been agreed upon behind closed doors, with the king's quiet blessing and William's strategic consent. She would keep certain charities. She would not be exiled, but she would no longer be a fixture of statecraft. And for Camilla, who once pushed past public backlash to ascend, that absence spoke louder than any demotion. With Camilla gone from the center stage, William and Catherine stepped into their roles with extraordinary precision. They were not trying to mimic Elizabeth or Charles. They were building something entirely new. Their first joint address delivered from the Windsor Long Walk to a sea of waving flags and cell phones set the tone. William's voice was calm, measured. Catherine's hand rested on his arm with unmistakable assurance. They spoke of duty, but also of transparency. They spoke of history, but also of innovation. They invoked Diana, but did not linger on pain. The message was clear. This was not a monarchy shackled to the past, but one reborn through empathy and clarity. Under their stewardship, the royal household restructured, streamlining ceremonial roles. The press charter was revised to protect royal children from invasive coverage. Climate, education, and mental health became pillars of international diplomacy. Catherine, now widely referred to as the People's Queen, opened palace spaces for public events, community mental health sessions, and early education think tanks. She hosted foreign first ladies with warmth that outshone protocol. Her engagements weren't just photo ops, they were outcomes. Reports were published, policy shifts followed. And behind her, always, was Anne, now recognized as a moral compass of the institution. Their once silent alliance had become the backbone of the monarchy's renewal. To his credit, Charles did not resist. He did not cling. In his final public remarks before retreating permanently to Balmoral, he said softly, "The strength of the crown is not in how tightly it holds power, but in how gracefully it lets go. I trust my son, I admire my daughter-in-law, and I know the future is secure." In those words, he sealed his legacy not just as a king but as a father and a steward. He left behind a leaner monarchy, a more conscious one. And perhaps most importantly, he demonstrated that the true mark of leadership is knowing when to pass the torch. Though no official coronation date had yet been announced, palace sources leaked that the preparations were underway for a ceremony unlike any in British history. No gold carriages, no 5-hour procession. Instead, a blended coronation, half in Westminster Abbey, half at Windsor's open grounds, with digital access, community participation, and global environmental themes. An homage to the past and a bow to the future. Princess Charlotte would read a passage. Prince George would stand by his father as page of honor. Louis, with mischief in his eyes, would likely steal the show. And as Catherine stepped forward to receive her crown, Anne, seated beside Zara, would rise first in applause. Camilla, if she attended at all, would be seated respectfully in the back rows. Dignified but distanced, present but no longer central. As autumn deepened and the crown prepared to pass again, royal watchers agreed. This was not just about titles or bloodlines, it was about character. Anne had been tested and vindicated. Camilla had risen and receded. Catherine had waited, and now she reigned in all but name. William stood ready, not with ambition, but with resolve. The same resolve that once made his mother, Diana, the world's most loved royal. The same resolve is now mirrored in his wife. Their reign had not yet begun, but the nation and the world was already bowing to it. If you followed this far, tell us, should Camilla have been quietly retired? Or should the monarchy have offered her a formal farewell? And what would you want to see in William and Catherine's new coronation? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to watch the full royal timeline on our channel, from Charles's historic withdrawal to the rise of the People's Queen. Because history isn't just what happened, it's what we remember and who we choose to crown in our hearts.